All right, welcome. Let me get this back up to normal to today's presentation. It is week 2, presentation 3. I apologize. My camera on my CCRI laptop is not working suddenly. I'm going to figure that out sometime today, I hope. Today we have a lot to cover. I'm going to try my best not to take too long, but this will be our one presentation for this week. We're going to talk about more influences on child development, and we'll talk a little bit about the trauma-informed perspective, and a little bit about assessment or really research in child development. Whoops. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to look at some course updates. I wanted to let you know that for your verification of enrollment, and actually it's going to be any of the activities due this week, but the discussion board is one of them. Every week I have a review and recap, and so this week we have to review child development throughout history. I have a video that I think will kind of bring some of the influences of culture into play. And then we're going to have a key terms discussion board activity. My ultimate goal is to create kind of a glossary of terms right in our discussion board. Then my way of kind of segueing into trauma will be talking about my own experience, some light trauma, as I like to say. We'll talk maybe not the pervasiveness of trauma today, but I'll talk about trauma briefly and how it's a lot of my perspective is informed by this idea that a lot of people have endured trauma. And we just know a lot better how emotional abuse can affect children and, later on adults. And then we'll do a quick overview of research in early childhood and kind of important points or things I would like you to know, and then I'll wrap up. I don't think anyone in here is in my online 2710 course. This presentation is almost identical to my other one. We use the same book, and a lot of the information in here is relevant to both classes today. All right, so I want to actually stop share. I want to check out Blackboard here. I'm just going to put it on student view, and then we'll do share screen again. This is the wrong class. We're going to go here. I wanted to show you a few pieces. Here you'll see the syllabus. Oh, I thought I was in student preview, sorry. There we go. So here you'll see the syllabus. Please note I update it regularly and I track changes. Please check the syllabus. Here is where things have changed. Weekly content is where you'll see a lot. I'm trying to streamline it so everything is here. This is where you will find information on your quizzes, your weekly quizzes, as well as my weekly lectures will be posted here too. I also wanted to make sure that we were aware of where assignments are located and that there are assignments that you should pay attention to. Oh, I realized I'd have to open that document. But I would really like that for you all to review these assignments as they're required for everyone. Make sure you know where you're going to observe. Now, there are options if it is impossible for you to get into a preschool or infant toddler room or to see a play observation. If that's the case, there are also video options, but I don't like to use those unless necessary. There are lots of different places you can observe preschool. I know that for a fact as a former preschool teacher. Infant toddler is a little more difficult, but if you find a childcare program, usually they will have at least older, 18-month-olds which I would be okay with because that's still a different type of care than preschool. And I want to make sure, I don't think there's anything else here, but I wanted to make sure everyone knew about the weekly content folder and the fact that, you'll see the discussion boards here. I did want you all to know, I apologize. I didn't realize that carrying over from the previous course included carrying over discussion board information. So I'm going to link all my discussion board posts to the weekly content. That makes it a little bit easier for me. Or did I do that? No, maybe I didn't. I think I did that on my other class, but that is probably going to be my plan. All right, let's stop share and then go back to our PowerPoint. All right, there we go. So we've checked out Blackboard. Something I definitely want to remind you all is that I use email frequently. So please check your email. I know that I want you to communicate with me in messages. For me, I hope you can understand it is just a little bit easier if I can use email through Blackboard, which is what I do. But if you message me, I will see it. I did respond to somebody who messaged me the other day. I haven't had many. Yeah. Verification of enrollment. So you will see that is due for me this week, which means you need to prove to me that you are in this course before I drop you. So that means in order for me to verify your enrollment, you need to complete one of any of the following assignments: the chapter quiz, the 2-minute essay, which will be during this activity, during this presentation, the discussion board, and the weekly exit ticket. Any one of those that you complete by Friday, let me highlight that, by Friday will count for your verification of enrollment, okay? And 2 of those will have the instructions right here. All right, let's do our review and recap. What have we talked about so far? So this one I'm going to try and use visuals to illustrate what we've done, and I hope that helps a little bit more than just text. So I didn't think that would happen. So here we're going to talk about the historical views on child development and how last week we talked about how until the Middle Ages, children were basically infants until they were 7. And once they were 7, they were considered adults because adults didn't have the bandwidth at that time to support child development. Infant mortality was so high that it was difficult to care for something that could die so quickly. The lifetime expectancy was also low. So this was kind of a response to the climate or the context of those who were living there at the time, who were, growing up at the time. Next, we have the Renaissance. And here we looked at the child as kind of distinct from the adult, but being pulled between 2 different forces of good and evil. I hope those animations help. And so mainly the idea of schooling or education was to kind of beat the devil out of the child. So fascinating, so not right, but a view that developed when they didn't have, proper research technique or technology. And then we come to the US and Europe in the 1900s or 19th and 20th centuries. And here we have a few different pieces coming together. We learn the importance of socialization for children as critical to child development. Think about language that children gain from not only having new models, but also having motivating models. Yes, kids learn from their adults, but they're more interested in learning from other kids than they are us. Also, this is when we started to recognize different domains. Now, there's more than this, but these were the ones that came up in the book. There was a recognition that there's emotional development, intellectual development, physical development, and social development. And that's most of our domains now, with the exception, we might name intellectual cognitive development. We have social emotional grouped together now. Language development would be kind of within that social piece. And then adaptive skills, right? Toileting and whatnot. But this is definitely where our views now have come from, and we know even more, but this is where we started to have this more traditional and more accurate view of child development in the 1900s. So this is an interesting piece. So last week we talked about the impact of oppression and how it affected certain cultures, not white people for the most part, but those who were in oppressed or marginalized groups. What I really love, might be a tough video, because I think if you are a person of color, it might be difficult to see how these children are responding, but I think it's also important to see how societal differences, not societal differences, how society can impact child development, how systemic issues can impact child development. So I'm going to have everyone's going to watch this video. I'm going to put it on. And then when we're done, you're going to write a 2-minute essay. But for now, I just want you to watch the video.
Quale bambola è bianca? Quale bambola è nera? Quale delle due è bella?
Questa.
Qual è quella bella? Qual è quella brutta? E qual è quella buona? Quale è cattiva? Qual è buona?
Lei.
Perché è buona?
Perché ha gli occhi celesti.
Quale è cattiva? Perché è cattiva?
Perché è tutto nero.
E qual è la bambola che ti somiglia di più?
A very short video, but also I think very important. So what I want you to do is write for 2 minutes without stopping, and you're going to use the following questions to prompt. And there wasn't much that happened, I know, but I had a few thoughts while watching. So how did you feel while watching this video? What was your immediate reaction to the children's responses? Why do you think, and part of it is said in the end, but why do you think children responded the way they did? Why is this important? How do these beliefs potentially impact development? Now, before you start, I am going to say one thing. That is not an experiment I think that could be done in the US or many places now. I think there's some fear of the repercussions of asking kids these type of questions, that they might internalize the responses even more than what they've already done to believe that this is true about which color babies are good and bad. And obviously that's not something in research with human subjects we're actually allowed to do. So just something to keep in mind. To me, I do think it's just powerful to see these very honest and authentic responses. So what I want you to do is open a Word document on your computer. And what you're going to do is answer the questions I've laid out here, or it doesn't have to be all of them. It could only be one of them. It might not be any. I want a reaction to this video, and I want you to write without stopping for 2 minutes, okay? I'm going to play this timer to help. It's not a musical timer. All right, that's a little scary, huh? Let's go to the next one. Whoops. Whoa, what happened? All right, next, vocabulary volcano. So this will be your discussion board activity for this week. Something I think is really important is to review some of the key terms that might be new, but I know are going to come up again and again if you're in these courses and even in any field related to human services. So what I want to do is use the discussion board to kind of create a glossary of terms where we don't have to look through a book. We can just choose certain terms that we think are important and put them up. So I have a bunch of terms from chapter 1 and chapter 2. You are going to choose 2. I just realized I might not, we'll see. You're going to choose 2 and you're going to define them. Well, the instructions are on the next page, but you will end up choosing 2 to define and rewrite in your own words. But these are all terms that are going to come up over and over again and might be important. You know, we talk about when it comes to culture, the importance of, you know, knowing what a historically underrepresented group is, what collectivism comes, where collectivism comes from, how race plays a role in development, how culture and ethnicity play a role. I'm not going to define SES or DLL. That might be on your quiz, although it might also be on the other. But those are very common terms in education and human services that you should know. And the difference between sex versus gender, especially nowadays, and just understanding what is a disability, what are special needs. just because some children do not have a diagnosis of a disability yet when you meet them, or at least for me, that was the case. That doesn't mean they don't have special needs or delays. The second chapter talked about assessment and research. So I focused in on some terms that are more important than others. What is an experimental study? Summative versus formative assessment. That's on your quiz too, but that's something that you'll learn about, that you'll talk about more in any kind of course in education and early childhood education. Normative charts, where we get our developmental milestones from, and also what are the issues with those. Case studies, cross-sectional versus longitudinal, those kind of go together, and then trauma and an ACE. These are your selections. I don't care what you choose. What you'll find is you're going to review and define all the words found on the page, and they will be there. They can all also be found in your textbook. I want you to review the discussion board responses. I want you to choose or review the responses that are there already, because you have to choose at least 2 terms to rewrite in your own words. You cannot choose the same term a peer has already defined or chosen. Post your definitions to the discussion board, and as I said, we're creating a glossary. That's simple. If you have any questions, or it is possible we run out of words, though both of these courses are kind of low in enrollment. If so, I might add some. But for now, I'm okay with what is there. Next. All right. So, oh good, this will be a nice short presentation. We have story time with Leslie. And for me, this is going to be an introduction to trauma, or some light trauma about me, which I've talked about before to many people, and I'm comfortable being open about it now. So I'm going to talk about my own upbringing. I had a very, very, let's say, typical life for someone who grew up in a white community. That's me and my brother. Clearly, that's me. That is kind of a symbol of my mom. My mom is my favorite person, one of my favorite people. She was a nurturer and caretaker, and I'm very fortunate that she was in my life. I don't have the same feeling towards my dad, because that is where much of my turmoil comes from. Oh, hold on. I forgot I didn't do what I wanted to do. And so there are many children and many adults, I'd say now, who suffered an incredible amount of emotional abuse and really had no idea what was happening to them, or that there was something wrong, because for many people, at least in the generation my dad grew up, emotional abuse is not considered so bad. And many baby boomers themselves, at least in my experience, suffered their own significant emotional abuse. And so that is generational, that is cyclical, and it continues to move from generation to generation. So I'll share some of my own experiences. I meant to do an animation here, but I'll start with one of the things my family did together. We played a lot of cards. I played a lot of poker and a game called 45s, which is common to the Merrimack Valley in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. I learned that card game at around 7 years old. And unfortunately, because my dad had a gambling problem, when we played, we always played for money. And he did always get upset with me because I typically made a mistake. What happened with this is I completely lost. I became very insecure about what was the right move to do. And I'll get into that a little bit, but that was one of them. There were a lot of times that I was yelled at for playing the wrong card in poker or in 45s because I was my dad's partner. That was very difficult. There were a lot of times I cried at the poker table. Should have been our fun family activity, but it was very weird for me. This was a big one. Why are you dressed like that? You look terrible. Why don't you dress more feminine? Something that my dad has only just realized is that he believed that women were most beautiful when they dressed in feminine clothes, and to him that was very light pastels, flowery items, skirts, dresses, and those were never clothing items that spoke to me. And I remember being I believe I was in middle school, so 11 or 12 years old, and I was wearing clothes from, at that time, a very popular clothing store, American Eagle. And my dad looked at me and said, "Wow, you look terrible. Why are you dressing like that?" That wasn't the only time that happened. That happened quite a lot. If I wore a lot of black, he would say things like that to me. But it was typically about, I'm not looking feminine. It's like, I'm not trying to look feminine. I don't want to look attractive, was what I was told. Again, this added a lot to me being unsure of myself, me feeling like the only way to survive was to cater to my dad's opinions and perspectives. Not just cater to, and cater to his needs, but that too. This was the hardest, and something that I don't know how many have experienced, but I doubt I'm the only one. When I was a kid, I was just lucky to spend time with my dad. You're such a brat. You should be happy. I'm spending time with you. I wish I could say I heard that only once, but I heard that over and over again when I was a kid. I'll give you an example of what would happen to me. So when I was growing up, my dad loved playing golf to a fault. He also loved to gamble, which led to us not having very much money, even though my parents both have graduate degrees. And so we would go play golf as a family every so often when I was younger. But what I would eventually learn is that my dad was not willing to pay for me to play because I was too young or didn't know well enough how to play, so it wasn't worth it. So I was just coming along for the ride, and I would have to watch my entire family play through 18 holes of golf without me. And when I started to realize this was a trend, I would get very upset in the car, and I would get upset. I would say, "Dad, why can't I play?" And he would yell at me, and this was his argument, that I should just be happy I'm spending time with my family, that I'm being a spoiled princess for not appreciating this time. Again, telling me I don't have the right to feel the way I feel, something that's very common, but also telling me that I'm not a good kid. So I've received a lot of messages from my dad that made me incredibly insecure and unsure of who I was. I was never certain of my actions, and you'll notice this in young children too. They start to demonstrate this need to please. They start to demonstrate this inability to make a decision because they've been reprimanded for making a decision their parent didn't like. These are the types of things that are kind of hidden under the rug. There's a lot of this type of emotional abuse that we see through social media as well. And I think it's very important that we're aware of it. I'm very aware of the fact that this was the abuse I received. This is my trauma this is what I fall back on when I'm in therapy, right? This is what I work on. There are many more significant and more severe forms of trauma. That does not mean that emotional trauma does not have an impact. It actually does. But it also means I recognize the other pieces of my life that I was very lucky to have. I had a loving mom. I had a good brother. I had a home. I had good schools to go to. I never had to worry about my meals. But there was stress in my environment, and there was stress from a very young age, and I was never comfortable being around my dad. And that led to some issues with me being able to be a successful student as I got older, because once things got hard, I struggled to be able to push and fail. I feared failing on my best work, which a lot of people do. So these are mine. And again, these are all things he was saying to me. And those are just kind of examples of we know a lot about, physical abuse and sexual harassment and abuse. And it's very easy to label those as traumas. It's harder to see these verbal altercations as potentially traumatic for kids. So understanding trauma, this is kind of an introduction from what the chapter gave us, but it is an experience that causes actual or threatened physical or emotional harm. Adverse childhood experiences, this is a tool basically. So a tool was developed by researchers to be able to kind of measure the amount of trauma a child had endured. It looks at all these different types of traumatic experiences and counts each one of these different types of traumatic experiences a child has had and gives that child a score. And that score can help professionals, probably more often than not social workers, identify the supports needed to help that child heal, because that is the ultimate goal. Sadly, most children have experienced an ACE. So the type of trauma that I experienced, it wasn't just that my dad also was absent. Those count as ACEs. And what is unfortunate is when we have these traumas, and as I explained, children tend to demonstrate externalizing outward behaviors or internalizing inward behaviors. So I like to give one of my own examples for internalizing behavior is withdrawal. I definitely would withdraw, so I would avoid making a mistake. And for me, I didn't really demonstrate externalizing behaviors. That was more my brother. Now, my brother, maybe not the same experiences as me, but he did spend a lot of time with my dad, and he demonstrates rage because of this. So we can, and these are things you see in adults, but these show up differently in children. When I was a child, I acted out a lot. When my brother was a child at home, he had a lot of difficulty sitting still. Now we both have ADHD, but beyond that, we also were coping with an environment that for us was not always safe and was chaotic. I bring this to bear because this is so important in understanding children and their development. Trauma can be the most difficult piece of supporting a child with special need because it presents issues that we don't even fully understand. And so the only way we can truly support children is to learn their unique and specifically individual stories. When we talk about, practice, even though this is just about child development, we always need to remind ourselves that every child is different and every child develops differently and every child responds to a traumatic experience differently. Resiliency grows in a lot of children. Some children do not have that same ability. Some children there's just a lot of different pieces that can form this picture. All right. I'm going to talk more about trauma next week, but for now I want to move on because it's after 2. And so the last piece is kind of an overview. I wanted to talk about how does culture impact research and experimental design. Again, I wanted more animations. I've been working fast. These last 2 weeks had a lot of ups and downs for me. So the most important pieces to keep in mind, and what the book highlights, is that much of the research, especially historically, that has been done by, pioneers of child development was done with white upper class children. And a lot of that is still true, sadly. I know that though I worked in a world where we did a lot of research and tried to find what we'd call representative samples or groups of people that were not just white upper class, it was still difficult. And part of that is just the wrong people reaching out to the wrong people. So because this is historically who has been involved in our research, that also means that, you know, the normative charts referred to in the text, developmental milestones, and something that everyone, not everyone, but something that's been discussed for years is the lack of validity of IQ tests when we're working with with diverse cultural groups, because there are questions that are in a context they're completely unfamiliar, or milestones don't involve these unique cultural traditions that might create different progressions. Some cultures highly foster interdependence. Some cultures engage in heavy or gross motor play very early on in development, and that can change the developmental trajectory and thus where children hit their milestones. But we still have to strive for evidence-based practices, which means we strive for those strategies and research that are effective. But if you're looking through the research, my best advice is to make sure that whatever practice or strategy you use supports the population that you are working with. All studies on human development will have some flaws. What I would say to you is to please take time to see who was assessed, who was involved in that study, and who you are supporting, or who you're trying to apply this knowledge to. If you're trying to apply it to the whole population, yet the study was only in Africa, that's not really possible. It's a terrible example, that doesn't happen. But if you're trying to apply a new strategy or this new information to a set of people in the Bronx of New York City, but the study was conducted in rural Maine, you're not going to have, you can't use that same, you can't apply that information. That's a completely different group of people. So that's my caution to you. And again, this is something that we'll talk about more, but much of the book in this, it's this chapter on research, but also the next chapter on theory, talks about the issues with how theories and milestones in early childhood were developed. And as someone who is teaching you this, I want you to know that culture does heavily influence development, and we can't always rely on our milestones or even these EBPs, evidence-based practices, that people have told us are effective when they're not tested on the right populations. All right. We got to our wrap up, yay. Let's get to what we talked about today. And this is where, all right, share screen. Share. This is where we will write. All right, so today we reviewed available materials on Blackboard and upcoming assignments. You and recapped last week. So what did we talk about? History, development, watched a video on race and development, and reviewed key terms for discussion board. We had story time with Leslie. Leslie's trauma, always fun. And then we discussed trauma and child development. Why is it? And then briefly we discussed research in early childhood and key points to remember. All right. That's what we discussed. Now, oh, I thought I had my exit ticket. I guess I didn't. That's weird. Anyway, there should be a slide that says exit ticket, but what I would like you to do after you watch this video is complete the exit ticket available on week 2 on Blackboard. It's just going to talk about this presentation. Did you find it helpful? Do you find, what pieces did you find most helpful? And I might ask you to define trauma or provide an example of trauma based on what we talked about today. Okay, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.